I'm 𝐦𝐨𝐫𝐞, CEO and founder of Psychable. With over 1.5 million visitors to date, Psychable.com is the leading online community committed to empowering individuals interested in legally exploring the healing potential of psychedelic assisted therapy. Today, I have the great pleasure of speaking to Gina Devani with the Psychedelic Journey. Gina is a facilitator of deep healing with psychedelic medicines. She is a board-certified holistic counselor and transformational psychedelic integration coach, working with people to prepare for, move through, and integrate psychedelic journey work. Welcome, Gina.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here with you.
Thank you so much for the important work that you're doing. If you can please share with our viewers a little about yourself, your background, and the path that led you to working with psychedelic integration.
Yeah, happily. I have been on a long healing path myself for over 20 years, and it started with many years of depression and really not, and at a time where I didn't understand myself about what I needed to do to help myself. And so I cycled through years of depression before I started to really work on it, and got a real wake up call with some health crisis that forced me to choose to stay and do something about it, and learn what I needed to do in order to just be here and thrive. So it just sent me on a very, very deep healing journey, working on childhood trauma. Primarily, I would say, is the was the content of my healing work, and then also subsequently, like gaining more skills to be able to work on my own issues, but then eventually to be able to work with other people. So many years of training and deep work and learning how to facilitate groups and deep healing for individuals. And so that's a little bit in a nutshell what has brought me here. And to psychedelics in particular, I had a concussion that I had a really hard time healing from. And I had an intuition one day to try LSD in particular to work with the changing what was happening in my brain, and found a guide. This was before I had never done any psychedelics at that point. Um, but intuition kind of drove me. I found a guide to work with, and LSD cured me that day, which is interesting. And they are doing studies on this now out in the world. And I've met other people who've had miraculous healings for traumatic brain injury with psychedelics. So it worked for me. And then it just triggered me along this part of my path to deepen into mostly plant medicine work, and become a facilitator and guide to help others do deep healing work.
Beautiful. Um, as a facilitator and a guide, can you provide us with an overview of your therapeutic approach and how it also aligns with psychedelic integration and healing?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. My therapeutic approach is a lot centered around internal family systems or parts work. Not everybody is familiar with the term internal family systems, but essentially the idea is that we all have different kind of aspects of ourselves that hold different beliefs and different strategies for managing stress, staying safe in relationships and environments and in life in general. And those aspects are below the conscious level and are very, very influential, and really are driving 100% of what we do all day, every day, if we're not aware that that's what's happening, and if we haven't yet cultivated enough like grounded self to sort of be the majority of our operating system. So trauma is all about these parts and what gets tucked away so that we can actually survive it. They're really good ideas that we have as usually small children in the mind of a 4-year-old, the mind of a 3-year-old. What strategies do we create to stay safe? And pretty much what we find is those were good choices. They were really good choices. And today, as adults, they are dysfunctional choices. And they are working against us in our desire to thrive in our lives and not suffer, not struggle in the way that we do when we're moving through depression or difficulty just handling life's challenges. Life is hard. And my approach with people is ultimately to expand their capacity to hold the ups and downs of life without it knocking people over, and then through getting there through this sort of lens of working out the childhood trauma. And I have not found any better tool for this than the combined sort of microcosm of internal family systems and psychedelics. I've tried many things over the years, and it's extraordinary. So I'm a big advocate for this work, for the safe use of psychedelics, and support people in doing that.
That's amazing. I was really struck by your share around grounding of parts. And I was curious if you can expand more around that. You reference, how we create strategies to stay safe, when we were younger. And while that worked for us, it doesn't quite, suit us now into adulthood. So just curious if you can expand more around the grounding of the parts.
Yeah. For most of us, we're not even aware that these kinds of aspects that are holding strong beliefs are living inside of us. We just think, oh, I'm running my life. I'm the one in charge in this brain, and it's just not the way it is. And you could look at it as the parts are our ego. Some people can better understand it through sort of that lens. And so if we look at it like all of our ego-oriented thoughts and behaviors are these wide variety of protective parts, manager parts, controlling parts, and then really young exiled parts that are the young one that got scared by something that happened in their life, and the protectors hid them away to keep them safe. I can tell a little story about an unearthing of a part of mine because I find that that's really helpful for people. So I knew for some time, for maybe I had become aware for about 6 years, that I was working with a core wound belief that said inside of my head, you're not allowed to exist, which is a really strong belief. And it limited me in my relationships. It limited me in my health. It limited me in my work. And it would be like I would get just so far with something, and then some feeling of unsafety would happen and it would set me back. And always it would send me into a depression that I would then have to. So it was this cyclical thing that happened for many years in my life. And then at some point I became aware of this belief. I did a shamanic journey with a friend, a shamanic practitioner friend of mine, several years ago, and she, through the journey, found this part of me that was looked like an old woman with her hair was forward and she's dressed in tatters and she's chained up in a dungeon. And years later, I learned this is a classic kind of scenario in internal family systems. I am not the only one that has found a part that is chained up in a dungeon. Like, it is someplace that our brains go. So this part is chained up in a dungeon and she's like screaming and yelling, saying, "Get away from me. I'm safe in here. Nobody knows I'm here. Go away." I won't use the language that she used, but it was very, very strong. And so we kind of, wrapped her in light and left her there. And I was still struggling with this belief that would come up, and I would feel it at certain times. It would really stop me. I almost felt like I would reach my hand out for something and it was being hit back, and struggled with overcoming whatever this was because I didn't understand it at the time. So fast forward several years later, and I'm still aware of this aspect, but now I'm working with mushrooms, and and it this actually took 5 or 6 journeys to be able to build trust with the parts that were protecting this one that was in the dungeon over and over again, and saying, "I will be here, and I'll just keep coming as long as it takes, and I'm not going anywhere, and I love you unconditionally, and just keep showing up, just keep showing up, just keep showing up." And finally, in a journey, I was able to get this part to come out of the dungeon. And when she came out of the dungeon, the disguise of the old woman fell off, and she was me as a 3-year-old. And so it's incredible the level of creativity our minds will employ to keep us from finding things out. And really extraordinary. And then through my process of integration, I was able to find out more about this part and why it was hiding out. And it was, so this is really interesting. And it's a great example of how we're thinking as a small child and how, as an adult, it's not logical. It doesn't make any sense. But this was my core wound. And this that I'm about to describe led to me feeling like I'm not allowed to exist. So I'm 3 years old. I'm on a family vacation. We're walking through like a creek or something. And I was afraid of water when I was little. And it was really only recently, actually, that my older siblings told me, "Yeah, I don't know what was happening when you were little, but you would fall into pools. You were always falling into water and having to be rescued." And I wasn't even aware of that. So, okay, there was a good reason I was afraid of water when I was 3. And back in the day, we had the styrofoam floaties. So I had my little styrofoam floaty, and we're walking through this creek, and I tripped and I fell, and my floaty cracked and broke in half, and I was devastated. And I did not have the kind of family that understood emotions, like many of us did not have that. And of course, I was told to be quiet and to just shake it off, and I was fine. But for me, it was terrifying. And in that one moment, I made the decision that no one in my family could be trusted, and that I was on my own in my life. Yeah. So that informed the rest of my life. And it was very difficult for me to build deep relationships, to feel safe in the world, because I felt I was on my own. And so through psychedelic journey work, I was able to find out what was going on, what was behind the struggles, what was behind the depression, and really integrate. So, going back to the question you asked many minutes ago about grounding in these parts, to bring these parts home, right? Not only the exiled young part, but the protectors that had been devoting their lives to keeping that little one hidden away where no one could hurt her ever again. And so, the actions in life are, well, we'll make sure that you just don't get close to anybody. We'll make sure that, you don't go here and you don't go there, that you don't feel safe in those places to keep you contained, kind of. So they're very influential in our lives, and we kind of grow up thinking, oh, this is just the way I am. No, this is not just the way we are. If we were really our true selves, we would feel free to navigate through the world. We wouldn't be afraid of people. We wouldn't be afraid of loving someone, or we wouldn't block someone's love from coming to us. And those are really common things that people struggle with and that limit our capacity for relationship. So, integrating those parts by kind of I call it like bringing them home, almost like you're the mama bird. Whether you're a man or a woman, you're the mama bird, and you bring these parts of you home and you like tuck them under your wing. And now you're the self with a capital S, and you're the one running the show and making more discerning choices about life, and acknowledging the fears when they come up and saying, yeah, I've got a feeling about that, let me just look at that for a little bit and be with it, rather than shoving everything into a corner or under a rug, but really like learning how to be with the emotions that are real, that we all have. And it's in integrating those young parts that we learn how to be with ourselves, and ultimately how to be in the world and be with other people in a way more healthier way. So it's extraordinary. I mean, from my work with therapy over the years, not psychedelic therapy, but just traditional therapy, and all the many, many people I talk with about therapeutic work. And I'm not knocking therapeutic work, because also psychedelic work is not the right thing for everybody. But I definitely couldn't get anywhere near this level of healing without being able to sort of pull off the covers of like what's going on in the beneath the surface. And that is the work that I do with people, is help them to understand what's going on in their psyche and empower them so with skills of their own, so that when they are in the psychedelic journey, they can understand a little better and navigate the terrain, the very, very challenging terrain of the psychedelic journey landscape, and get a lot of work done. So
Wow,
yeah, and
that's really
supporting people
powerful.
in that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really, really powerful. Um, I think what you shared is so rich and there's so much nuance to it. I think one thing that comes forth is around relationships. As you were sharing, one thing that came forward to me was thinking of a friend who, she has a wonderful boyfriend that it is one of the most deepest relationships she's ever been in, but she's doing everything to sabotage it. And she is, so much of her own insecurities is coming forward also because she's had a number of bad relationships or men that have betrayed her, right? And yet she has this beautiful man in front of her who is so loyal, so faithful, but she somehow can't accept it. And I think there's so many people out there that are really struggling around relationships with their own insecurities, and that the part of them that said very early on that I'm not going to trust anybody. Right. So I was curious, if you could say a little bit about just, that sort of how IFS works with that parts work in relationships with, a love partner, a romantic partner.
Yeah. Well, we'll keep choosing quote unquote the wrong people so that we don't have to actually face the exiled part. It in choosing people who are not safe for us, it keeps us safe in a really dysfunctional way. We don't actually have to look at what's really there and why we are keeping ourselves from being in healthier relationships. And then, to be honest, like, we don't have good relationship skills, we don't have good communication skills um, to be able to be in a healthy relationship. I Part of my healing journey was finding a really, really good nonviolent communication teacher and finding out, like, how am I contributing to what's going on? And that was a major, major piece for me. And I do recommend that for a lot of people as well. Some kind of relational communication training, because nobody taught us. Nobody modeled it for us. In fact, if you look around in our world to every movie and television show and all over Instagram and Facebook, everything that's modeled, or majority of what's being modeled relationally, is codependence, enmeshment, blaming and shaming, not taking personal responsibility for our contribution to what's happening. And so I think those are they're all like protections so that we don't actually have to see the truth.
Mm.
And it's remarkable actually, because subconsciously the truth terrifies us, yet it's the pathway to major freedom and being able to be happy in life. uh,
Liberation and thriving.
Totally.
And yet we
Yeah.
cut ourselves away from that and we disconnect ourselves from it.
Yeah, and we don't even know that we don't, it's this we don't know what we don't know thing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I don't know that my lack of being able to be with people in a deep way is because of these very subconscious aspects from my childhood. And it's interesting because my sister, when I first started doing this work, she had a lot of questions and, what's it all about and this and that. And I'm telling her, and she says, "Oh my God, I would never want to know any of that." Which is like case in point, people are terrified of
The
what,
truth.
like, they know there's a lot in there and they're like, "Oh my God, no, I don't want to know."
Yeah.
So
I
it's
have a
not for
follow-up
everybody.
question to that.
Mhm.
I don't want to know, but I think the book that you were referencing, the nonviolent communication, is by Rosenberg, right? Is that the one that?
Marshall Rosenberg, yeah.
Yes, that's a
Yeah.
great book. I shared with everyone on my team actually, and that book has been such a great tool in really clearly knowing how to deploy the tools when being in relationship, being in community, being in dialogue with another. So it's a great book, and I'm really grateful that you brought it forth. Um, Integration. What does that mean? How would you sort of go about defining it, and what are some of the tools that you deploy around integration?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I also do a free integration circle online. And so I'm working not only with just people who have been out in the world doing their own journey work, and mostly they've done it on their own if they're coming to me in that circle, but then also the people that I'm working with through their journeys here. So they're very different, right? So if I am more involved and can help people to prepare for and move through the journey, they I impart a lot of understanding to them so that they, when they're in there, because, a guide cannot be inside someone's mind when they're in the journey. They really have to be able to do some work on their own in there. And then if there's the places they get stuck, we can provide interventions and ultimately like a safe container, right? So those people are more equipped to then integrate because they have had support from the beginning. And integration is making sense of what just happened, because the internal psychedelic landscape can be extraordinarily confusing and also misleading, which not a lot of people talk about. And maybe we'll get into this when I say misleading. I notice there is the protective force of sort of bypassing, so spiritual bypassing inside of the journey. And it's important to talk about, and I talk with everybody about this, so we'll be talking about that too. But what's fascinating to me is the people who come to me in the free online circle have been doing work on their own for years, and they are not getting anywhere because it's so confusing. They're still cycling through the essentially the show that the protectors put on to try to convince you of something, anything, so that you won't actually see what's really going on inside of you. And so it's kind of a funny thing. You can't integrate that. You actually have to break it down and realize that it was a ruse, like a smoke screen, and it's not actually the real thing. But you have to, as a guide and facilitator, I have to be very careful about how I approach that with people, because you don't go in and say, oh, you're wrong, that wasn't true. No, it doesn't work that way. I will guide people through, and this is where the nonviolent communication comes in very handy too, and also my work with 𝐒𝐫𝐚𝐬𝐿, just gentle inquiries and looking for, as 𝐒𝐿𝐵𝐚 puts it, trailheads to kind of find out the truth of something. And going back to like the idea of spiritual bypassing, I always say it's a great idea. If that's where you're at, it's great. It's great, because I guarantee the things that I was eventually able to find in my subconscious, I would not have been able or willing to look at those things 5-10 years before. And so the bypassing work that I did all of those years in the in-between space was a great idea to stay safe and to keep kind of looking until I was ready to see. So those, all of those kind of elements are important, and I also acknowledge it can be very confusing. I happen to understand all of that really, really well, and can help people navigate the confusing aspects of their journey space. And even in these free circles, it's remarkable, because inevitably we'll wind around to the possibility that maybe there was something else going on there. And you can just see the little light bulb go on above somebody's head, and that now they're like churning, oh my God, I wouldn't have thought, I didn't know that, And it's great. It's so great just to be able to sort of plant a seed of possibility that maybe there's something else there.
Yeah, that's really, really potent. And I really am appreciating your bringing forth this element of spiritual bypassing, which is can often occur when doing psychedelics or in community, right? Where folks show up with this sort of God complex, and all of a sudden they're like the next Jesus to humanity, and they're sort of the savior of it. And that's where, you start seeing cultish type behaviors and whatnot. So I think there's a lot to be said around that. And I think what you're touching on is the very critical piece with it, which is that integration element, really going within self and um, willing. There's the need of that willingness to do the work, right?
Mhm.
And oftentimes I find that people are terrified or scared of doing the work. um, they're not just terrified and scared of doing the medicine or psychedelics, they're terrified of doing the work. So how does one get to a point of doing the work? And how have you, I guess, helped support somebody coming to you saying, hey, I need help, but maybe the willingness isn't necessarily there yet.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, there's a helper, there's a different helper for different people. I find that most of the people who come to me are ready to do the work, and the people who aren't going to resonate with me. And there's somebody else for them, somebody who's willing, and maybe operates more under like a spiritual umbrella of and not that I don't also do, like, this is a sacred ceremony and I definitely bring spiritual aspects into the ceremony to create the container. Um, but I'm not leaning on the plant spirit to tell us what to do or what's happening, because honestly, mushrooms are trickster spirits and you can't, it's really a test. So they're testing you to see if you'll buy their story or not. And that's another topic, but um, so yeah, there are different kinds of facilitators and different kinds of containers. And I think for people who are really ready to do deep work and the work, as you put it, which I also use the exact same terminology, one-on-one work is really important for those people, not group work. So group work is kind of funny because it's either for the people who aren't ready yet, and a lot of relational stuff will get triggered in a group. So, it's useful because it does bring stuff to the surface. But you're not going to go in and devotedly like look for these aspects, because frankly, they're too shy and they're not going to come out in in a way that's really effective for healing in a group. So groups are good in a way for like people who aren't really ready to do the work, but want to scratch an itch and what's there, and maybe kind of get into the spiritual container of ceremony. And so there's usefulness to it, right? Or the other place that group work is useful is when people have done deep work already and then can work together to work on collective healing, work on the relational field, work on kind of higher levels of energetic transformation, not just in the individual, but in the collective. And that's just like another level. So sort of like there are these tiers of what's appropriate for which person in which container. But a lot of the people that I work with it is in a one-on-one capacity, and sometimes with couples who are trying to work things out in their couple body, their relational field together. And I'll do that by working with each of them individually and then bringing them together, so that kind of we cover all the bases and make sure there's no not too much in the unknown when we bring them together. So
Um,
yeah, I feel like I kind of talked around there a
No,
little
it's
bit.
no, it's really, I mean, there's so much richness in what you're sharing. And I have so many questions popping up as you're speaking. I was curious if you care to expand a little bit more on your couples work, um, how you typically approach couples work, and how
Sure.
do you bring in that element of, creating that container for the couple, and maybe even share like a success story, or one in which, is
Mm.
continually unfolding.
Mhm. Yeah, one of the really beautiful ways to work with couples is, of course, like doing individual work with each of them completely separately first, and helping them to sort of unearth these parts of the subconscious so that they have more awareness about what has been informing them in their relationship all along. What informed them to choose this partner? What serves which needs in the relationship? Like, really just become more consciously aware of what your relationship is already, right? How did you get here? And in order to do that, you have to find a lot about yourself first, right? And then people can become advocates for understanding each other's stuff. And there's a lot of, it's not a quick process, right? Working with a couple. It's not a quick process like, oh, in 6 weeks, we're going to get you into a journey together. No, because we have to find out, like, where are we enmeshed? Where are we codependent? How are we communicating? What am I demanding that you do so that I can feel safe? So it's a lot of working through sort of these aspects of the relational field, and bringing awareness for each of them, and then together, of course, and then eventually to be able to go into a space and support the partner to hold the other in medicine. So this one is sober, this one is in the medicine, and it builds this, and then with my guidance for what to do, what not to do, because you can really mess things up for a partner in a journey. So helps them to bond on a different level, and trust. And ultimately, like, this is what we're looking to create in relationship, is the ability to be sovereign in oneself, and be able to understand, like, where you can trust your partner, where you can be vulnerable. And we want to be able to be really vulnerable with our person and be safe with them. And I was married for a long time, and looking back on it with what I now know and what I've worked through in my own new relationship, couple body, looking back, it's like, oh my gosh, we were only ever connected through our wounds, and we were never a safe person for each other. And it was a really good choice for us to end the relationship and move on, because where we were individually in our lives, we were never going to heal to the place of being in a healthy relationship, in part because only one of us was willing to do the work. So, and that's often the case, So, not that I'm like making a case for divorce. I love seeing couples that can work things out and heal together and grow together, but ultimately I'm supporting you to follow your soul's journey of healing, whatever that needs to look like. And you're supporting me to follow my soul's journey, whatever that needs to look like. And hopefully our spiritual paths and our discovery paths look different because we're each so unique. So really supporting couples to celebrate each other in what they're doing on their healing journey, and being able to understand it, like, I understand what you need on your journey, and you understand what I need. And
Yeah, that's.
so it's quite a process. Yeah.
Have you ever done ceremonial work or medicine work together with couples? I hear that you sort of do one, sort of sober, one in medicine. Do you ever put the couple in one container as well?
Yeah, eventually you move into, but they're both in the medicine together. And but I work really carefully with couples in sort of a long process because very safety and psychological safety and healing are just such a high priority for me. And also being trauma informed means that we go slow, and we don't leave any stones unturned. So yeah, we get there eventually, but
Mhm,
it's not the first stop.
mhm.
And I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who are doing that, just couples journeys, and maybe there's like four couples and they come and they do the journey. And I'm not saying that there's not healing to be done in that container. It's just not, I I have this part of me that like really wants to be efficient and wants to do things impeccably. And so it's useful. It's useful. Like I'm very aware of this part, and we have sort of an agreement. I'm like, yeah, you're useful. You don't need to choose a new job. Actually, we can kind of partner up together in order to really help people on a very, very deep, deep level.
Mhm. Yeah, beautiful. There's so much. I feel like that in itself is another segment with respect to couples. But I'll just say that oftentimes I find that when couples come to this work, they're already like overwhelmed and wanting to just like, throw in the towel and and then one introduces the element of slowness where
Mhm.
they're just like, I want to be efficient in this. Either we're going to do this or we're not, either you're going to put a ring on it or you're not. And it's just like, whoa, let's slow it down. And yeah, I'm curious how you work with and integrate that slowness into that sort of relational field.
Yeah. Well, I'm a very big advocate of sovereignty, and not to say that I'm like an advocate of polyamory and all of that. It's not actually my way, but sovereignty, like really knowing oneself and um, knowing what my needs are, what my passions are, getting in touch with one's own sexuality. What I think there's so much performing in relationship, and we're not even aware that we're performing and doing what we think we're supposed to be doing. And but really, I think to answer your question, like how to even introduce the idea of slowness, is really about it comes from illuminating the things that we didn't realize were influencing us in our movements in the world and movement in our relationships, and why we're in a relationship in the first place.
Yeah, I
So
think to your point, really bringing in that present moment awareness and that attunement is so key in this work. I was curious, you spoke a lot around integration, but on the other side, before these heightened states of consciousness, preparation is oftentimes so key and I feel like overlooked as well.
yeah.
Can you share with our viewers, what does preparation work look like? And, how do you go about preparing your clients before they enter into that sort of ceremonious space or that journey?
Yeah, it's interesting. Everybody's a little bit different, and it depends on where people are in their healing journey and what they already know about themselves. So if people are, and this is really, it's a discernment that I have, but also that I share with them, I invite them into the process of deciding when the right time is to go into the journey. And some people need a lot more lead time. Most of the people who come to me have been doing healing work for a long time, and they don't need as much lead time. They're more prepared to go in there from a few conversations to prepare. And I always have people hold an intention. And what's so funny, intentions are funny. So when you say yes to going to a journey, going into a ceremony, you open the door and stuff starts moving immediately. So you may come and say, this is my intention for my journey. I want to love myself more. Well, I mean, that's totally generic, but you open the door and then stuff starts churning in your life and showing itself to you. And then they're like, oh my gosh, I, my intentions totally changed now because all this stuff is coming to the surface. And so it's like this.
Give us a good one, Gina. Give us like a
uh,
really meaty example of
yeah,
you
yeah.
and the scene sort of unfold around the intention of saying yes
Yeah.
prior to
Oh my gosh.
ceremony.
So I'm trying to pick one. I'm trying to pick one. There was a recent one with somebody who really just wanted to have like a spiritual experience and opened up creative channels. And I wouldn't recommend mushrooms for something like that, but I would recommend LSD. And so once they said yes, oh my goodness, all kinds of things started churning up from the depths, and like these younger kind of strategies for staying safe, and different kinds of beliefs, and then like some stuff started stirring up between that person and their partner, and that was illuminating that there's something else actually that is asking to be looked at.
Mm.
And so it's almost like, with these subconscious parts, they they want to come home and be under the wing. They want that, but they need to trust you first. And if you're not even willing to look for them, then they don't trust, right? But that you're even willing to go in there in the first place is sort of like a nudge, like, oh, they might be able to find us. It's like this hide and seek game, but they really want to be found instead of wanting to stay hidden. Um, and what was happening for this person was that these parts were coming up, and in the journey, so the journey shifted, the intention shifted, the medicine shifted to mushrooms and MDMA, just to make it easier to get in there. But and this very young 3-year-old part came to the surface, and of course in the beginning there were all these protectors that showed up that tried to convince this person that something else was happening, and that like, oh, these body movements were happening, and that was like a release of energy, and as though that was what they had come there for. And I observed for a while, and kind of created space for that to be happening in that person's body. And then I got an intuitive sort of suspicion that there was something else going on, and that there was a protector that was actually shielding a younger part from being found, and was using what would be a common pathway of distraction for this person, so that they would never even look past this right here. And so just like a suggestion of like, and of course we had done preparation in advance so that we were on the same page about the protectors and the potential for exiles and all of this. And I asked a question to see if we could find a trailhead potential, and they said, oh, do you think this is a protector? And everything shifted in that moment, because it's like once you see the protector and see through them, they can't hide anymore and they can't do their thing anymore, and you're able to get past them. And where internal family systems in particular comes in, um, is that protectors give permission. You ask for permission to pass. You ask for permission to gain access to the exiled part. And this is where it's really different from like EMDR, which I don't think you would do in connection with psychedelics, but you go right there without asking, and it can be very disruptive. It can help a lot of people too, but my experience with the MDR was I started to have panic attacks in my sessions with my therapist, and I had to slow way down. And slowing way down for me meant learning this landscape of the protectors in the psychedelic journey. So anyway, that's an example of a way that it can go.
Yeah.
And how this is like a lot of things packed into there, right? How the intention can shift, like it shifted from this one thing to this whole other thing, and in doing so the medicine shifted, the approach shifted. Like it's very important for me to like observe what's going on for the person, get them as close to the truth as I can without telling them what to do. I'm not telling anybody what to do. You have to know sort of inside of yourself where to go, what to do. It's just like anything. Nobody can tell us what to do. We have to figure it out on our own. But we might need some nudges towards seeing things in a particular way so that we can see through a different lens than we might normally.
Yeah, I was struck by your comment around EMDR, where I think that's where, having somebody experienced and trained and coming from that trauma-informed place is so critical. And, I've had folks, rave about EMDR and how amazing it's worked. And while that is a great tool for someone, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the right tool for another. So I'm really appreciate that you brought that up. The other question I had was, you mentioned, the person coming in with the intention of having a spiritual experience and opening creative channels, and you recommend LSD versus mushrooms, which can be also tricky. Can you expand more on that? Like why one medicine versus the other? What kind of frequency or energy one or the other carries, and why are mushrooms tricky and but also really potent and powerful at the same time?
Yeah. Oh, why are mushrooms tricky? Well, I mentioned a little bit earlier, like about this trickster quality of them. Um, and I do really, I've had this experience, I've observed it in other people as well, that in a way, like they're testing you in the beginning. Like if we're just talking, if we're going like spiritual talk for a moment, and talking about like the plant spirit of the mushroom.
Yes, let's
uh,
go there.
Okay, we're going there. So I find, and many people find, mushrooms to be a trickster kind of energy, and they'll test you to see if you can get past their trickster influences. And once you do, once you can see through it and realize, oh my gosh, they were just, you know, helping me to keep this other stuff hidden ultimately, right? And I think it's kind of like that, and because it totally works that way. And then it can be that our protector parts, so I'm going to like play devil's advocate a little bit. So there's a possibility that it's a trickster plant spirit. It's also possible that our protective parts see this opportunity to trick you in a way that you haven't been able to be tricked before because of the medicine and what it does in your brain. So I don't know, it could be either or, but there is definitely a trickstery thing that happens. And if you're not able to see through it, and don't know that that's a possibility, you can be very fooled by the show that is put on in your brain. For some people, I worked with somebody who had taken mushrooms for 18 years and only ever saw like the geometry visuals only. And they came to work with me, and I I suggested the possibility that, and this was after the session because they actually uh, were so in very deep and not and metabolized mushrooms really quickly. So they were kind of back and talking to me within an hour and a half, which was like record time. So um, and um, and then I find out they've only ever seen these sort of like geometrical shapes and fractals and things for these 18 years and thought this is what a mushroom journey is. And
Wow.
I made a suggestion. And until working with me, that person had only ever like done mushrooms out on hiking or in nature or whatever. And wanted to have an experience like on the mat with the eye mask and the music and everything. So, which is how I work. And and I made a suggestion that they had come to a door and that they didn't realize it was a door and that they could ask for access to what was on the other side of the door. And so they went away back home to where they lived, and because this person had traveled here to work with me, and did some like personal journeys, and and it was revelatory.
Mm.
They
Wow.
had no idea there was anything else there.
Wow.
And it made sense. This was a protector because this person had very intense childhood trauma, had lost their father at a very young age, and shoved it all away so they could function in life and not be taken out by the grief and the loss and the longing for a
Mm.
father, it made sense. And so this is really interesting about mushrooms. So mushrooms are particularly useful for getting into this, going back to your question, getting into this kind of content ultimately, like what's beneath the surface. You just have to know that there's a surface to, sort of like a membrane to break through. And I think for a lot of people, just like for this person, planting the seed that there might be something else, because the mind is so powerful, was enough to kind of like give birth to what was next for them in this like looking inside and trying to become more self-aware about like what's been informing me all of these years.
Yeah,
Um,
you help pierce that membrane for them.
Yeah. Right, right,
Yeah.
right. Exactly. And then LSD for it seems for most people, it's not as useful a tool for deep work, although I don't want to say that like as a blanket statement because that is not true across the board, and it depends on the dosage and it depends on the situation. And I know someone who worked with very high dose of LSD after doing quite a lot of other journeys, and then came to this place where they were inspired, like soul inspired to do, I think it was 750 micrograms, which is a very high dose of LSD. And the whole thing was a somatic experience of getting into like these very, very young states of like physical positioning in a way. And this is something that also can happen in mushrooms to a certain degree, is like finding yourself in like an infant kind of like movement, and maybe something else is going on inside of your head, but there's something somatically important about making those motions, like completing these motions. And like Peter Levine teaches a lot in somatic experiencing, like about how trauma is this stuck energy because we weren't able to complete a movement. And some of those movements can be as simple as just like a gesturing, and or maybe you weren't breastfed, and it's this like making the movement with your mouth, and those kinds of things can come up. But going back to this person who I know of who had this very big LSD journey, and it was all somatic and all of this body working things out, and it was the final piece in that this person making sense of and healing from a lot of trauma in early life. And so they're just useful tools at different times. And then ayahuasca is like a whole, I don't serve ayahuasca, but I have worked with it, and it's like a whole other situation.
Yes,
And
I can attest
is
to
uh,
that.
is very much a plant spirit,
Yeah.
is very much a gateway into other realms. You know, there's no denying that something else is going on there, um, in a multi-dimensional kind of aspect. So everything kind of has their different purposes and usefulness at different stages on the path. I personally work mostly with mushrooms. If I'm like digging stuff up, like let me get into the garden and dig it up and find stuff. And I had a scare this winter because I live high on a hill, and in the winter, if it gets icy, it can be slippery. And I moved from California to someplace snowy, and I have no experience driving in the snow. So I'm learning, but I had a scare on my hill where my vehicle was sliding and sliding toward a cliff, and it did stop. But you know, there's a moment where you're not sure whether it's going to stop, and if you're going to go over the cliff. And so I had this like panic that happened that I had never experienced, like physical terror like this before in my life. And I had this like pain right in my chest, like where your heart would be if it was on the other side. And I then the following week, I had 3 panic attacks, which are not normal for me. And I was like, okay, something got like ruffled, something really deep got stirred up. And so I did a mushroom journey to essentially, like, I mounted an expedition to go rescue an exile, because I'm at the level where I can work this way. And this is not what most people do, nor would I would recommend to most people to go into a mushroom journey when you're having panic attacks. But for me, it was the right thing. So, so I did, and my partner sat for me, and he is somebody that I trust in that space. And I was able to go in very deep, and ultimately found an infant part that had a trauma. And it's a whole other long story, and it'll take forever if I go into all the details. So we're going to leave that one. But I was able to rescue this infant part, and bring it back out. And this was a useful tool. Mushrooms were a useful tool for getting in really deep. Did I have to go through 25 layers of protectors to get to the infant? Oh yeah. But I know how to do that. I know how to keep like putting, I always say, I put my 𝐭𝐜𝐿 hat on, my somatic psychotherapy hat on, and just see through it. And it's just very easy to get sort of swept into a corner with either demons or angelic light beings that are trying to convince you not to keep going down this corridor, because you're eventually going to find the truth. And they don't want that, because they've spent their whole lives protecting that one, right? And then, so I did that. It was incredibly successful. And then I went into integrating that in the aftermath, of course, getting back to our integration conversation. And then a month later, I worked with My dog just came to visit me. I did a journey with LSD because, like, to almost balance it out, like, there's this deep guttural kind of earthiness of mushrooms and getting in really deep into the underground. And then LSD is this sort of like up and out and getting to like swim in the sea of pure consciousness and be in the oneness. And in my experience, it's important to do both, for me anyway. I somatically, it's like it's good to be reminded what it feels like to be in the oneness, so that we don't forget as we're walking through this earth plane. And it's really important to do this work of digging up like what's going on inside of there, so that you can be conscious and aware. You can be conscious aware in all aspects of your life.
Yep, conscious and aware. This is sort of a, I guess, multiple questions combined into one. Um, and it's around how to create a safe, supportive environment container for clients who are seeking psychedelic integration, right? And
Mhm.
you reference, the spiritual aspect to create the container, and also you talked about trust. Um,
Mhm.
how do you know who to trust? How do you know that this person is going to give you that safety, is going to create a container of integrity so that you can focus on healing and doing your work?
Yeah, there's so many things that come up around that question. So for like preparation and integration work and really being able to trust someone, like in terms of, and I think you're also like asking, how do I choose someone? How do I choose a guide who
Yeah.
would be the right one for me? Um, a couple of things are kind of across the board important. Um, for me, it's been really important to find someone who has done enough of their own work. I have heard too many stories about guides who lose their seat in a psychedelic session because they haven't done their work. So there's something that happens with their client that triggers them, and then they lose their presence. They lose their ability to be supportive. I had a friend once who worked, the first guide that they worked with, um, um, as they put it, dropped them on their head, like, and made them feel shameful for what was coming up. So you want to make sure that it's somebody who has life experience, who has done their own work to the nth degree. Someone who has a lot of skills in particularly with trauma, someone who is trauma informed, skilled with trauma, understands that part of the internal landscape. And probably if you're somebody who has childhood trauma or any kind of trauma, somebody who gets you, who gets the kind of trauma that you have lived. And it's not always a clinician, right? um, I, I have a lot of respect for the world of psychotherapy, and not all therapists have actually done their work. And so so I want to be careful about like how I talk about that, because I really do, like, it's so much to become a licensed therapist. It's so much to get a PhD in psychology. Um, there's a tremendous amount of work that goes into understanding the depths of psychology and psychosis. And I mean, not your everyday kind of average person walking through the world, psychological issues, but they learn so much more. People who are hospitalized and schizophrenics and bipolar, like there's a whole other thing there. And for certain people who have a more complex PTSD kind of history, and potentially like some psychosis in their family, I would only send them to a clinician to work with, because there are a lot of other factors that have to be like kind of held there. And then for other people who are sort of like working with your average variety of childhood trauma or life issues that are getting in the way, I find like finding somebody who really understands what you've been through, and has worked their own stuff and is skilled enough to really help you, and who also understands like how to hold like a sacred container, a safe space. So that can get complex as well. So I'm pausing a little bit because I'm like, what do I share about that? But like in my practice, like where I am, and if I hold a journey for someone here in this space that I have done a tremendous amount of clearing work on this property. I've cleared the property, the land, the home, the space, and keep it clean energetically, spiritually. I have a crystal grid on my 5 acres that keeps stuff clean. So I'm like going like layers deeper than some other people would have the ability to do. But so I kind of I operate like in the cosmos and like here on Earth as well, to kind of cover all the bases. But that's how I work.
That's amazing.
So yeah.
Gina, I was wondering if there was anything else that I haven't asked you that you would like to share with our viewers.
Hmm. Well, I guess one of the things that comes up is where I work. So I am sort of bilocated. I work with people in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I also work in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I have a retreat space in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So people will come here on personal retreat and to do deep work. And then when I'm in the Bay Area, I work with people mostly in their own homes. So, or a place that they secure. So I think that's just sort of like a logistical thing of like where I am in the world and where people can find me. But a lot of people come here to Santa Fe to work, to do deep work here with me.
That's fantastic. Gina, thank you so much. You have shared so much wisdom and knowledge from all of the years of experience and the work that you have done, not only for yourself, but also for others. And thank you. Thank you. Deeply, deeply grateful for the work that you do. Thank you for sharing this time and space with us today.
Thank you so much. And thank you for creating the container for facilitators that you've created. It's just been a tremendous, tremendous help, and space for education and resources for people.
It is my honor and pleasure. Thank you so much, Gina.